Summary of 1 Thessalonians. Introduction. Paul wrote this letter during the 18-month stay in Corinth as part of his second missionary journey, probably around AD 49 to 51. He had established the church in Thessalonica, but had been driven from the city by opposition that threatened the future of the local church if he did not leave. After travelling south to Athens, Paul had sent Timothy back to see how the church was faring, and was pleased with Timothy's subsequent report. However, there were also a number of issues to be addressed, and Paul does so in this letter. One of the key themes centres on their concerns for those in the church who had recently died, and there was a clear misunderstanding that these people had missed out on the second coming. Paul reassures them that the dead and those alive when Christ comes will be equally united with their Lord. There were none of the key disciplinary difficulties that would later arise in Corinth, or the problems with false teaching that occurred in the province of Asia, Achaia and Galatia. So Paul deals mainly with encouraging the church to persevere as their persecution continues, and gives instruction on their lives in the sight of God. Chapter 1. After the introduction, verse 1, Paul begins with a thanksgiving to God for the saving benefits bestowed on them, verses 2 to 5. And then mentions the certain proofs of the success of the gospel among them, which was notorious and famous in several other locations throughout the region, verses 6 to 10. Chapter 2. In this chapter, Paul reminds the Thessalonians of the manner of his teaching among them, verses 1 to 6, and then of the manner of his conversation among them, verses 7 to 12. Afterwards, of the success of his ministry, with the effects both on himself and on them, verses 13 to 16, and then apologizes for his continuing absence from them, verses 17 to 20. Chapter 3. Paul gives further evidence of his love to the Thessalonians, reminding them of his sending Timothy to them, with the mention of his design therein and his inducement so to do, verses 1 to 5. He acquaints them also with his great satisfaction at the return of Timothy, with good tidings concerning them, verses 6 to 10, and then concludes with fervent prayer for them, verses 11 to 13. Chapter 4. Paul gives earnest exhortations to abound in holiness, with a caution against uncleanness, enforced with several arguments, verses 1 to 8. He then mentions the great duties of brotherly love, and quietness with industry in a believer's calling, verses 9 to 12. Paul concludes by comforting those who mourn for their relations and friends that had died in the Lord, verses 13 to 18. Chapter 5. Paul, having spoken at the end of the previous chapter concerning the resurrection and the second coming of Christ, proceeds to speak concerning the uselessness of inquiring after the particular time of Christ's coming, which would be sudden and terrible to the wicked, but comfortable to the saints, verses 1 to 5. He then exhorts them to the duties of watchfulness, sobriety, and the exercise of faith, love, and hope, as being suitable to their state, verses 6 to 10. In the next words he exhorts them to several duties they owed to others, or to one another, verses 11 to 15. Afterwards to several other Christian duties of great importance, verses 16 to 22. And then concludes this epistle with prayer, assurance, and personal greetings, verses 23 to 28. Summary of 1 Thessalonians ends.